is because of a health issue or because of how old their parents lived to be. And so, yes, in average it's going up, but we have to look more closer. How old were those around us that we're most connected to? What is our expectation from there? So whenever you're looking, look back at that. How much do you need to survive that time frame? There's a story about a grandfather talking with his grandson who's about to graduate high school. Granddad sits down with him and says, "Well, what's your plans?" "Well, I guess I'm going to graduate this May, and then I guess I'm going to college." Some of y'all may know this story. "Well, great. Then what?" "Well, I guess I'll graduate college and I'll go in the workforce. I'll get me a job." "Great. Then what?" "Well, I guess I'll go get married and have kids. And okay, great. Then what?" "Well, I guess I'll work for a number of years, and then eventually I'll retire, and then take life easy." "Great. Then what?" "Well, I guess I'll play with my grandkids, go fishing, go traveling." "Great. Then what?" Grandson's going, "I don't know where you're going with this, but okay. Well, I guess eventually I may end up having to go in a nursing home, and then I guess eventually I'll die. Then what?" As we're talking about this subject, this is what I kept coming back to in my mind. We want to plan, we want to focus, we want to deal with these last few years of our life. But if we don't put it in context with what comes after that, what we did to prepare really doesn't matter. There's a YouTube video I saw a long time ago with the demonstration, and I brought it back out. And basically, what it talks about, this is our existence. But this blue tape here, again, this is not represented to scale. This blue tape represents our life on earth. And so, what we're talking about is this last little bit right here before we get to all this. And so we want to make sure that our decisions that we're making today are based upon the needs in this time frame and our wants in this time frame, our eternity, and not so much about this. There's always going to be another step to take in life. Some we look forward to taking, some are exciting, and some we're scared to take. And so I want us to have this discussion in perspective, in proper perspective. So as a Christian, do we retire? I hear no. I hear lots of no's. Okay, so there's always going to be work to do. Retirement is a biblical principle. We see it in Numbers talking about the Levites. How long were they supposed to work? Anybody know? Numbers 8, verses 24 through 26. "Now regarding the descendants of Levi, who is 25 years and above, he is entered to work the service and appointed in the place of meeting, but starting at age 50 years, he is to retire from service and work no more." So they were expected to work 25 years. Okay? Now, does that mean they stopped doing the things they were commanded to do by God outside of the temple? No. But in those specific tasks they were charged to do inside the temple, they had a set time frame that they were supposed to do. Titus 2:2, if you want to turn there. Question is or my question to you is at what point, or what is your task to do in the congregation as you get older? And so we flip over to Titus 2, What's the work that we continue to do? Verse 2, it says, older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and steadfastness. Verse 3, older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, submissive to their husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled, and show yourself in all respects to be model of good works, and in teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may not be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. So in your later years of your work in the congregation, that's your task. That's your calling, is to raise up and to teach the next generation how to be faithful workers, how to be faithful Christians in their lives. So we never retire. And in our culture, retirement may be a strong word, because so often at one point, well, I'm too old to do this, and so we just stop altogether. But we have to train, and some of the older people in this congregation produce more fruit, more spiritual fruit than a good portion of the rest of the congregation. And so there's still work to be done. There's still things to do. So as we put our lives into perspective, again, looking at what's available before us, because we want to make decisions so that we know that we end up in heaven and get to spend the rest of this part there. Let's look at Philippians chapter 1, 19 through 26. And we're going to get there. Paul had the right perspective. In verse 21, he says, for me to die is to gain. For him to cross over from this spot to here was to gain. If I'm living in the flesh, that means fruitful labor to me. So if he's here, he knows he's got to work. But if he's over here, it's all the better. It's to gain. I'm hard-pressed between those decisions. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. Verse 24, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. He wasn't too worried about retirement and not working, or the financial costs there. Christians never retire. Revelations 2:10, be faithful unto death, and I'll give you a crown of life. 2 Timothy 4:6, or verse 8, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, not only me, but to all those that loved his appearing. So we want to make sure that we're putting away heavenly treasure, where moth does not corrupt. We want to be prepared for a fruitful retirement for when we meet the Lord, our ultimate retirement. So, again, context, priorities. Now, we still have to live through those last 15, 20 years, depending on your longevity. And so we want to have our goals, we want to have our visions in the right frame of mind. And I hope in that vision, if you've been faithful before retirement and wanted to be a giver, that part of your planning is included being a giver in retirement as well. Okay? So let's flip over to Matthew chapter 6. We're going to be spending a good amount of time there today, hopefully. And in your personal study, I want you to study Mark chapter 10 in light of some of the things we're going to talk about today. Last week in Proverbs 29 and 18, Jonathan read that in his, saying if we don't have a vision, we don't have restraint. Basically, that verse summarized. So we've got to have that vision in order to meet our goals. Because if we don't have that vision out front, we're going to live the way we want to today and not worry about the future. We have to have a passion to have something, to have a cheerful heart of giving. And so the same thing, we have to have a passion towards preparing for retirement in order to have a fruitful retirement. Let's look at Matthew chapter 6, 25 through 34. Whenever you think about trying to outlive your retirement, in my mind, it comes back to these thoughts, these concerns. Let's look at verse 25. Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is life not more than food, and body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, they neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? And which of you can be anxious, can add a single hour to a span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient are today's for their own trouble. The underlying concern about outliving retirement are those questions. And so if we are Christians and we believe that what Christ said here is true, we know God's going to take care of us. And we know we're going to have to rely on him at some point. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a miraculous gift to us in like the Israelites going through the wilderness where here's food, manna falling before us, and we go and gather it. Look around you. God calls the brotherhood to take care of those that can't take care of themselves. And so if we've been faithful Christians, it's my job to help you in retirement if you're not able to make it your own way. It's my job to make sure that your needs are supplied. It's not just mine, it's yours. Keep it in perspective, because if we're seeking God, we're seeking to glorify his kingdom, he's going to take care of us one way or the other. No matter what we fall into. So Luke 14:28. And Lynn, this was the verse I was trying to come up with a minute ago. It finally came to me. This here it talks about when do we evaluate, or do we not sit back and count the cost of a tower before we start building it. We got to look at retirement the same way. We got to look, what is it going to cost us in retirement to live? And then we have to take a step back and prepare, because you can have grand visions and grand expectations of retirement, but if you don't really consider how much that's going to cost, not just now, but then, we may not be prepared for it today. So we've got to sit down, we've got to count the cost, we've got to analyze it. How long am I going to live? How much do I want to actually have? What do I want to actually spend in order for us to meet those needs, to meet those things that we want to do? We're going to talk next week some about Luke chapter 12 and the rich fool, but, Luke chapter 12, the rich fool, but the latter part of that, it parallels this do not be anxious, and at the end of it, Luke states, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I don't want you to have an idea of, well, I gotta take care of myself 100%, I gotta do all this all the way. That's the American thought, that's the American vision to be self-sufficient. But we can do that. But we got to make sure that God and we're putting up treasures in heaven through good works, good deeds. So what's your vision? Where are you having to go in the next 5 years? What are you needing in 5 years, 10 years, 25? Those that are younger, where are you at in 50 years? What about eternity? Where are you at? Proverbs 21:5 is the plan of the diligent leads surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty only comes to poverty. Planning gives fruits when quick schemes ultimately fail. Okay? So we're called to plan for the future. We're called to be ready for it. But if plans fail, the church has your back. Following up on John's lesson about giving and setting yourself up not to outlive your retirement, we have to start back to the working years. And I know many of y'all in here are not in that phase anymore. And we have to balance what we're putting aside with also what we're giving in the time frame. So there's a balancing act here, guys, and I can't give you the answer, because whenever we have examples in the New Testament about how to give. Let's look at Mark 12, 41 through 44. We see the poor widow giving what? 2 mites, which means she didn't have hardly anything at all to begin with, and she gave it. So we've got that example, and she was commended for doing that, commended for giving more than everyone else that gave. Someone who had nothing was willing to give it all. That's what Christ did for us. Out of her poverty, she gave everything she had. Luke 12, verse 33. Christ calls us to sell all of our possessions and give to the needy. Pride yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. So Christ gives us command to sell all. He was talking, and I don't have this verse, it's in verse 12, or chapter 12 of Luke, I believe, where he is talking to the rich ruler and says, yes, you've done great. Now go sell all that you have. Now, the way we look at that more often than not is that and those possessions are what was holding him back from being all in for God. We have to be willing to give up anything that's holding us away from God. Because taking care of houses, taking care of vehicles, taking care of investment plans, and taking care, all takes time. And that's our most valuable resource that we have now. And so the more we focus on taking care, the less we're able to do for God. And so there's some benefits to being able to just give it all away, give it all to God. I'm not telling you to do that today, because we're also told later in 2 Corinthians 8, give as you have abundance, so that whenever you lack, you can be given too. There it doesn't command us to give away everything. But when we have more than we need, we're called to be willing to share it. Acts 4, whenever everyone was there on Pentecost, they sold all and they had all in common. Everything was everyone's. Acts 5, we see Ananias and Sapphira. Now, were they punished for not giving everything, or for not giving everything? No, they weren't punished for not giving everything. They were specifically told, it says, it was yours to do with what you wanted to. They were punished for lying, saying, here, I'm giving you everything, and held some back. So that, I believe, gives us comfort, gives us some reason in saying we give, we can hang on to some of what we need to take care of ourselves. It's not required of us to give everything, as long as we are putting things in perspective, as long as we're putting God ahead and what He calls us to give. 1 Corinthians 16:2, John covered this briefly. On the first day of every week, we are to put aside as we prosper. I'm going to give you some numbers that's going to probably turn your head on prosperity. Prosperity is defined to succeed in material terms and be financially successful. Everybody kind of agree with that? Okay. As Americans, even in Mississippi, we're more prosperous than most of the world. We prosper in the fact that we have food on our plates, we have a roof over our head, have more clothes than we can wear. We have a vehicle that can get us to anywhere we want to within a reasonable amount of time. We have entertainment at the flip of a switch. We are prosperous. Now, all that costs money to have all those things. Everyone's definition of rich is relative to those around them. In Mississippi, middle class is deemed $27,000, just under $28,000 to $83,500. So if you fall in that range, you're middle class in Mississippi. But those that are making 28 are going to call those that make 84 rich, right? Well, they're prosperous. Middle class is 28,000. But if you only make 15,000 annual income, you want to know where you fall on the world scale? You're 56th percentile. You're more prosperous than 56% of the world at $15,000. Now, that doesn't get very far in the United States because you're only more wealthy than 10%, or more prosperous than 10% of the rest of Americans. So I understand I'm throwing out some numbers here that, yes, it sounds one way, but versus another. And that's why I want you to go back and study Mark 10, I believe it was. Is that what I said earlier? Yeah, Mark 10, 17 through 31. Because the rest of the world views us as rich. Whenever we look around and say, well, I'm not rich. So, as you're trying to define what you need and what you want, planning for our financial future, and when we're unable to work is an expectation based upon our reading of Proverbs. We've got to plan. We've got to discuss planning. And from our prosperity, our success, we have to fund our future and provide for others. That's called we're expected. And hopefully our planning, again, continues to provide for others in retirement if possible. So, how are we planning for that? Are we planning for that? For those that are still in the working years, as our income grows, as our working lives, as we get bonuses, as we get pay raises, we have choices with what we want to do with our prosperity. We can do several things. We can cover our needs. This is, again, over and above needs being housing, utilities, food, clothing. We can fund rainy day funds. We can pay off debt, whether that's credit card debt or auto loans. We can do college savings. We can pay off and save some money and raise our retirement benefits. We can pay off good debts such as mortgages. We can increase our giving. Those are all great things that we can do with the pay raise that we've got that put us on a better financial footing. But more often than not, as we get pay raises, we say, well, you know, I've always wanted to do this. We look back to what our wants, our needs, our desires are. We redirect this new prosperity to personal wants. And sadly, I've got to use this phrase, you got to keep up with the Joneses, right? You got to keep up with your neighbor who has the new toy. You got to keep up with someone else. We got to have the latest fashions. We've got to have the newest vehicles. We've got to have the latest phones. We've got to have a certain type of meal. We've got to have certain housing, certain entertainment, certain travel expectations, certain schools to go to, certain hobbies, hunting, fishing, clothes, jewelry, shoes, cosmetics. None of these things are bad in of themselves. It's whenever we put all those things over and above our eternal goals. When we put those things above our retirement goals. When we put those things over and above our giving goals. So we want to make sure that we have those goals in place, because with those goals, we're going to restrain what we're doing with the money we've got today. So if you're not in retirement yet, I'm going to give you hopefully some things that you can work on just a little bit here in the last 5 minutes of class. You have to define your own prosperity. You have to come back and say, how much do I actually need to live on so that I can meet these goals, so that I can do more? And so you may have to decrease your standard of living. If it's just all a rat race to keep up with someone else or keep up our appearances, you're never going to make it out of that hole. You're never going to be able to plan for the future. more worried about the here and now and not the future. You have to save, period. You have to. If you aren't saving it now, you won't have a retirement fund or a retirement available to you at that time. And I don't want to get into a political discussion, but you have to honestly look at our financial state in the government and say, is retirement even going to be there for Social Security? Now, the vast majority in here, y'all don't have to worry about that. It's going to be there for you. It may not grow as quick as inflation, but it's going to be there for the most part for you. But something's got to give. Something's got to change if you're younger. Whether that's pushing back when they're going to allow us to start taking it out because the life expectancy changes, or whatever else. So your plans have to have that contingency. Limit your increases, your standard of living increase whenever you do get those raises, you do get those bonuses. And just because you can doesn't mean that you always should. Pay off debts. Invest things, whatever gives you the best return, best reasonable return. Give you some numbers. If you invested in the market, it returns in general 7% a year. And over 25 years, if you put $20 a week into that, it would turn into $70,000. So $1,040 a year, that's about $25,000. Over that 25 years turns into $70,000. If you do 100 per week, that's $352,000. You can get into some large numbers pretty quick whenever you're looking at retirement. And most of y'all are looking at me, Jeremy, I'm way past those decisions. I can't do anything about that. Okay, I understand. That's why I said I'm not going to be able to meet all your needs today. Those nearing retirement, you got to think about your cash flow. Are all my big debts, all my big bills paid off? Is my house paid off? What can I get my expenses down to so I'm just paying for cost of living in retirement? Get those bills down. Pay off the notes. Pay off our borrowings from during our working time. Make sure your investments are structured such for your retirement goals. You don't want to be investing like I am 25 years away whenever you're 5 years from retirement. Okay? Who here has heard of WorldCom? Anybody invested in WorldCom at one point? We had one. What happened to it, Jim? Corporate fraud wiped out millions of dollars just like that. Who here was looking at retiring roughly 2002 time frame? Anybody? What happened back in that time frame? You remember? Dot-com bubble. 76% of the market crashed, gone. People that had plans, they were ready to go, they were getting ready to retirement, plans just went out the window. Who retired around 2008? Anybody? We got one. What happened at that time frame? Real estate and the bank bubbles popped, lost 56% in the market just like that. Guys, don't be anxious. We can lay out the best plans. You can have the perfect goal. You can be ready, and just like that. Something that you had no choice in, no decision in, nothing goes up in flames, whether you were prepared for it or not. Those in retirement, are you planning short-term and long-term? Are you going to be able to meet your cash flow needs in the next little bit? Are you beating and keeping up with inflation? If you have it in a CD, you're losing money. Inflation's about 3%. CDs give, what, 1? Okay. Try to keep up with inflation. How much should you have saved? Okay, these are people in working age. By age 30, you need to have at least what you have in annual income saved for retirement. 1 year's annual income. By age 40, 2 to 3 times. By age 50, 4 to 6 times your annual income. By age 60, 6 to 8 times your annual income. And by 67, about 10 times. Go into retirement with about 10 times of your annual income, your working income. Well, just like you are as you're working, some people make more than you. Same thing's going to happen in retirement, guys. Some people are just going to make more than you in that time frame, and that's okay. Matthew 6, 19 through 21, do not lay treasures up on heaven where moth and rust destroy, but then thieves break in. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and dust does not corrupt. Real quick, I want you to look at chapter 6 of Matthew in totality. This is all one sermon from Christ. Verses 1 through 4 says, give to the needy. Christ says for us to give. And do it in secret so that you can receive your reward. Verses 5 through 15, pray. Pray that you will have what you need for the day. 16 through 18 talks about fasting and showing that you are not without. 19 through 24, lay up treasures in heaven. And he finishes all that off and says, look, I've just told you to do a lot of things. Don't be anxious about any of it. Don't be anxious about any of it. 1 Timothy 5 calls for families to take care of their parents. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially members of his household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion is what? To take care of the widows and orphans in their afflictions. What's their affliction? They don't have a household income. So as the church, we're called to take care of them. It's all about balance. It's all about putting those priorities right. Now, I know a lot of y'all were expecting to have a surefire answer to all your questions today. I didn't give you one. But I hope you're not so much worried about this portion now, and that you look more at this portion. Thank y'all for your attention today.